My job is to calculate risk. I analyze volatile markets, model corporate debt, and put a precise number on the probability of disaster. But what they don't teach you in business school is how to quantify the risk of a good man. What's the formula for a reputation? What's the asset value of a perfect family? And what happens when you suspect the numbers are a lie? These were the questions that didn't have a spreadsheet, and they were about to ruin my life. The ballroom glittered, a universe of crystal and muffled applause. It was the annual Hospital Foundation Gala, the biggest night of the year in our small North Carolina town, and my father, Dr. Robert Hayes, was the sun around which every planet in this room orbited. Tonight, they were naming him Man of the Year for the third time. I stood beside my mother, her hand a delicate, proprietary weight on my arm, my brother Ben on her other side, his posture a mirror of my father's. We were the portrait of a perfect family. My mother, Caroline, was radiant, her smile a masterpiece of practiced warmth. Her entire life had been a project in service of this image, the respectable surgeon's wife, the flawless hostess, the keeper of the family flame. "Isn't he wonderful, Olivia?" she whispered, her eyes fixed on the stage, glistening with what looked like tears of pride. "He's done so much for this town." Ben nodded emphatically, his gaze filled with pure, undiluted worship. At 30, he still looked at our father like he was a god, not a man. On stage, my father was in his element. At 62, he was handsome, silver at the temples, his voice a calm, reassuring baritone that had delivered diagnoses and offered comfort for decades. He spoke of duty, of community, of the sacred trust between a doctor and his patients. "The only name that matters," he concluded, his eyes sweeping the room, "is a good name. It is the only currency with true value." The room erupted in a standing ovation. I clapped until my palms stung, a genuine surge of pride mixing with the analyst in me that noted the immense social capital being displayed. Later, back at the sprawling colonial house I grew up in, the energy of the night evaporated, leaving a hollow silence in its wake. My mother hummed as she put away her pearls, while Ben rehashed the highlights of the evening. It was all so normal, so precisely what was supposed to happen. But have you ever looked at something you've seen 1,000 times and suddenly noticed a detail that was wrong? A color that was just slightly off? A line that wasn't quite straight? That's what happened that night. I came downstairs for a glass of water, the grand staircase creaking under my feet. The house was dark, save for a sliver of cold blue light from under the study door. I pushed it open gently, expecting to find him reading a medical journal. Instead, my father was hunched over his phone, his shoulders tight, the celebrated Man of the Year completely gone. In his place was a stranger, his face illuminated in the screen's glow, his thumb swiping frantically. He didn't hear me approach. I saw a flash of vibrant green and gold on the screen, a flurry of numbers and symbols I didn't recognize, before he flinched, startled by my presence. He shut the phone off so fast the motion was violent, dropping it face down on the leather desk blotter. "Olivia," he said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. "I didn't hear you." His smile was instant, but it didn't reach his eyes. What was in his eyes? It wasn't fatigue. It was fear. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. Just getting some water," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I glanced at the phone, a black, inert rectangle on the desk. Late-night emails from the hospital? It was a plausible excuse, the one he always used. "Something like that," he replied, standing up and stretching, a performance of nonchalance. "Always something." He deflected, changed the subject to the gala, to how proud he was of Ben, of me. But the image was seared into my brain, the tension in his shoulders, the frantic motion of his thumb. the speed with which he hid the screen. My professional instincts, the ones that screamed when a CEO's projections didn't match the cash flow, were now blaring inside me. It was a tiny crack in a flawless facade, a single data point that refused to fit the established curve. It was nothing, I told myself. It was a trick of the light, a moment of stress after a long night. But for the first time in my 34 years, I looked at the architecture of my perfect family and felt the unsettling shudder of a compromised foundation. A few days after the gala, the memory of my father's face in the blue light of his phone was a splinter in my mind, a small, persistent irritant. I was working from my parents' house for the week, a concession to my mother who claimed she missed having me around. The truth was, she needed tech support. Her latest nemesis was the online banking portal, a system she was convinced had been designed by Russian spies to steal her identity. I found her in the sunroom, staring at her tablet with a look of profound betrayal. "Olivia, darling, can you look at this? It's all nonsense," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "It says the mortgage payment didn't go through. Can you imagine? The bank is so incompetent." She laughed, a brittle, airy sound that didn't match the tension in her hands as she clutched the device. A mortgage payment? Declined? For my parents? It was an anomaly so statistically improbable in the universe, I knew that it felt like a bug in the code of reality itself. What if it wasn't the bank's error? "Let me see, Mom," I said, pulling a chair beside her. The scent of her Chanel perfume filled the air, a familiar fragrance of stability and order. On the screen, in stark red letters, were the words I dealt with daily in my professional life, but had never once associated with my own family. Payment declined. Insufficient funds. It was a digital slap in the face. My mother was already crafting a narrative to contain the damage. It must be a transfer delay. Robert moved some money for an investment, I'm sure. I'll call them later and give them a piece of my mind. Her explanation was plausible, but her nervousness was not. It radiated from her in waves. A professional analyst learns to read more than just the numbers. You read the people behind them. You learn the tells of a CEO trying to hide a bad quarter. And my mother, the CEO of the Hayes family reputation, was showing every tell in the book. "I can fix it right now," I offered, my voice calm, clinical. "I just need to look at the transaction history to see what's going on. We can probably clear it up in 5 minutes." She hesitated for a beat too long. "Oh, I don't know, dear. It's so personal." But the alternative was calling the bank, an ordeal she dreaded. Reluctantly, she handed me the tablet. "Fine, but don't get lost in all those confusing numbers." I logged in, my fingers flying across the screen. The main account page loaded. The balance was shockingly low, barely 4 figures. The declined mortgage payment was for $5,200. It wasn't a small amount. This wasn't a simple oversight. My heart started a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I clicked on the transaction history, and the illusion of my family's perfect financial health disintegrated in real time. It was a bloodbath in spreadsheet form. The screen was a long, scrolling catalog of hemorrhage. There were constant daily cash withdrawals from ATMs, always just under the maximum limit. $300, $500, again and again. Who needed that much physical cash? Then came the larger transfers, the ones that made my breath catch in my throat. Thousands of dollars, wired to entities with names like Zenith Gaming Services and Fortuna Interactive. I didn't need to be a genius to know what they were. My mind, trained to find patterns, saw the terrifying logic instantly. It started small months ago, then escalated. The frequency increased. The amounts grew larger. It was the classic data signature of a spiral, of an addiction gaining momentum. It was a story of desperation, told in debits and wire transfers. The man who spoke of a good name as the only currency of value was setting fire to his own fortune in the dark, one click at a time. The man of the year was a gambler. I felt a cold wave of nausea. The whole thing was a lie. The charity balls, the speeches, the perfect house, the good name. It was all a facade, and I was staring at the rotten, decaying framework behind it. The numbers on the screen didn't care about reputation or public service. They were cold, hard, and merciless. They told a story of a secret life, of a deep and terrifying sickness. And my mother's frantic excuse about a bank error wasn't a mistake. It was a desperate attempt to patch a hole in a dam that was about to burst. The tablet felt heavy in my hands, like a slab of stone etched with a history I was never meant to read. My mother watched me, her face a carefully composed mask of polite inquiry, but her eyes were wide with a silent, screaming panic. How do you confront someone about a lie when their entire existence is built upon it? Do you pull one thread and hope the whole tapestry doesn't unravel into dust? I took a breath, the air in the pristine sunroom suddenly feeling thin and cold. "Mom," I began, my voice betraying none of the chaos erupting in my gut. I kept it level, the tone I used with clients when I had to deliver bad news about their portfolios. I swiveled the tablet to face her, my finger pointing to one of the larger recurring wire transfers. "Can you tell me what Fortuna Interactive is? It doesn't look like a standard investment vehicle." Her smile tightened at the edges. It was a valiant, heartbreaking effort to maintain control. "Oh, that," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "That's one of Robert's new ventures. Something in tech. You know how he is, always looking for the next big thing. It's dreadfully complicated." It was a good lie. It was vague, played to my father's known ambition, and subtly condescended to my ability to understand. But the numbers didn't lie. "It's not a venture," I said softly. "It's a casino, an online one. And these cash withdrawals? $500. Almost every day for the last 2 months. What's that for, Mom?" That's when the mask didn't just crack. It shattered. Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed elegance dissolving into the raw terror of a cornered animal. A single, choked sob escaped her lips, and then the dam of secrets she had been holding back for years burst. The tablet slid from her lap onto the floor with a soft thud as she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. The truth, when it finally arrived, came not as a shout, but as a flood of desperate whispered words. "It started 4 years ago," she wept, her voice muffled by her hands. "Just little bets, football games, the horses. He said it was for fun, a way to unwind from the stress of the hospital. He deserved a little fun, didn't he?" I listened, my analyst's mind frantically trying to model a disaster that had already happened. The origin story of every catastrophic failure is always a small, seemingly harmless deviation from the norm. A single bad decision that compounds over time. "But it wasn't fun," she continued, her voice gaining a frantic edge. "It got bigger. The stakes got higher. He was always chasing a loss, always so sure the next one would be the big win that would fix everything. I helped him. I gave him money from the savings, believing him. How could I not believe him? He's your father." The shame in her voice was a physical thing, a poison that had been slowly killing her from the inside out. This wasn't just his secret. It was hers too. Then came the numbers, the real ones, far worse than the transaction history showed. "We remortgaged the house 6 months ago," she confessed, the words tumbling out. "He said it was for an investment fund. Then there were the loans. 2 of them. And the savings. Olivia, there are no savings. There's nothing left." She finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading, stripped of all artifice. She was no longer the perfect wife of the town's most respected man. She was just a terrified woman on a sinking ship. She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "You can't say anything," she begged, her whisper fierce and desperate. "Nobody can know, especially not in this town. It would be the end of him. All his good work, his reputation, everything he has built for us. It would all turn to ash. You understand, don't you? It would kill him." She wasn't just asking me to keep a secret. She was asking me to become a co-conspirator in the lie. She was asking me to help her hold up the facade, even as the foundation turned to sand beneath our feet. My mother's plea for silence echoed in my head for hours, a frantic prayer for a miracle I knew wouldn't come. Silence wasn't a solution. It was an accelerant. In my world, unacknowledged risk doesn't disappear. It metastasizes. It grows in the dark until it's big enough to swallow you whole. I found him that evening in his study, the same room where I'd first seen the crack in the facade. He was reading a biography of a famous statesman, the picture of intellectual calm. How could a man fix the world while his own was burning down? I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing like a gunshot. He looked up, a warm smile on his face. "Olivia, to what do I owe the pleasure?" He was the man of the year again, the benevolent patriarch. I held the bank statements I'd printed, the pages feeling flimsy and absurdly inadequate for the weight of the truth they carried. "Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I laid the papers on his mahogany desk, a neat stack of evidence against him. He picked up the top page, his smile faltering as he scanned the columns of figures. His first line of defense was confusion, a tactic I'd seen CEOs use when confronted with poor quarterly results. "What is all this? It looks like you've been doing my bookkeeping. Is there a problem?" He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses, his expression one of mild paternal amusement. He was casting me as the diligent but slightly overzealous daughter, meddling in things she didn't understand. "The problem," I said, keeping my voice even, "is that the mortgage payment was declined. The problem is consistent, large-scale cash withdrawals and thousands of dollars in wire transfers to online gambling sites." I named them: Fortuna Interactive, Zenith Gaming. "These aren't investments, Dad. They're casinos." For a moment, his composure vanished. I saw the same flash of fear I'd seen the other night. But then it was gone, replaced by a wall of condescending calm. He was rebooting his system, choosing a new defensive strategy. He took off his glasses and sighed, a performance of weary patience. "All right," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, the picture of a man in control. "So, I place a few bets. It's a hobby, Olivia. A way for me to unwind. God knows I've earned it. After 30 years of holding lives in my hands, don't you think I'm entitled to a little entertainment?" He was minimizing, rebranding a catastrophic liability as a harmless pastime. "It's not a hobby when you've remortgaged the house and drained every last dollar of your savings for it." I shot back, my voice rising. That's when he pivoted from defense to attack. His face hardened, the paternal warmth vanishing, replaced by a cold, surgical fury. "How dare you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "How dare you come in here and speak to me like that? You went behind my back, snooping through my private accounts like a common thief." He stood up, his height and the force of his anger suddenly filling the room, making it feel small and suffocating. He was no longer a man explaining a hobby. He was a king whose authority had been challenged. "This isn't concern," he snarled, jabbing a finger at the papers on his desk. "This is a profound lack of gratitude. Who paid for your education? Who gave you the life that allows you to sit in judgment of me?" He was twisting my motives, turning my fear for him into an act of betrayal. He wasn't just denying the problem anymore. He was making me the problem. This isn't about gratitude, it's about reality. You're sick. You have a gambling addiction, and you need help. I am not sick, he roared, his voice bouncing off the book-lined walls. I am in control of my life, and I will handle my own finances. I don't need help, and I certainly don't need a lecture from my daughter, who seems to have forgotten her place. The conversation was over. He had made that clear. He was a man who had built an empire on the foundation of his own infallibility, and he would sooner let the whole thing burn to the ground than admit a single crack. I had walked into his study with a diagnosis and a potential cure. I walked out facing a wall of denial so absolute it was its own kind of religion. And I was the heretic. Being rejected by my father felt like a door slamming shut in a vacuum. There was no sound, only a profound and sudden pressure. I was an analyst with a catastrophic risk assessment that the CEO refused to even look at. But this wasn't a boardroom. It was my family. And in any failing system, you don't give up after the first failed attempt. You look for other stakeholders. You build a coalition. My only remaining hope was Ben. I found him at the clinic the next afternoon. He was in his element there, the administrator of our father's small, successful kingdom. The clinic itself was a reflection of my father's public persona, calm, pristine, and reassuring. Ben's office was just off the main reception, and he looked up from a stack of files as I walked in, his expression one of mild surprise. "Liv, what are you doing here? Everything okay?" He was 4 years younger than me, but in this context, he always seemed older, more grounded in the family business. "Can we talk for a minute? In private?" I asked, closing the door behind me. I decided on a direct approach, the only one I knew. I wasn't going to ambush him. I laid out the situation as I saw it, not as an accusation, but as a problem we needed to solve together. I told him about the bank accounts, the declined mortgage, the online casinos. I watched his face for a reaction: shock, disbelief, anger. I got none of it. He just listened, his expression unchanging, his hands folded calmly on his desk. "What do you do when your bombshell fails to explode?" When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy and clinical. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he let out a slow breath. "I know," he said. Just 2 words, delivered with a quiet, devastating finality. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. He knew. He had known all along. My desperate search for an ally had led me to the gates of a fortress where my enemy was already waiting inside. The conspiracy wasn't just my mother's desperate silence. It was an active, ongoing partnership. "You knew?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Ben, how could you know about this and not do anything?" He finally looked me in the eye, and for the first time, I didn't see my younger brother. I saw a lieutenant, a faithful defender of the crown. Do what, Olivia? Ruin him? Drag the name he spent his entire life building through the mud? He's Dr. Robert Hayes. He's earned the right to have his weaknesses. He said it with such conviction, as if it were a self-evident truth, a law of nature. His logic was a twisted tapestry of love and denial. He saw our father not as an addict, but as a titan who, after years of bearing the weight of the world, was entitled to his own form of release. "Our job isn't to judge him," Ben said, his voice taking on a righteous edge. "Our job is to protect him, to cover for him. That's what family does. We hold the line." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the town that revered our father. "You see things in profit and loss, Olivia. This isn't a spreadsheet. This is a man's life, his legacy." I was speechless. He was framing my pragmatism, the very skill that defined me, as a character flaw, a cold inability to comprehend the higher laws of family loyalty. He was a true believer in the myth of our father, while I was the apostate who had seen the ugly truth behind the altar. He turned back to me, his expression a mixture of pity and resolve. So, no, I'm not going to help you confront him. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing, making sure the bills get paid and the cracks don't show. You should do the same. The coalition was a fantasy. I wasn't just alone. I was the enemy. The 2 days that followed my confrontation with Ben were a masterclass in denial. We were a family of ghosts, haunting the hallways of our own home, speaking in pleasantries that meant nothing. My mother discussed gardenias, my father talked about a new surgical technique, and Ben recounted amusing anecdotes from the clinic. We were all actors in a play about a happy family, and the script was so deeply ingrained that we could perform it in our sleep, even as the stage was crumbling beneath us. But what happens when a character from a different, much darker play walks on stage? The illusion was shattered on a Thursday night. I was in the kitchen, making tea, when my father's cell phone, left on the granite countertop, rang. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, Marcus. My father was in the den, and before he could get up, the call went to voicemail. A moment later, a notification pinged. A voicemail had been left. My father walked in, saw the phone, and his body language shifted. The easy, relaxed posture was gone, replaced by a rigid tension. He picked it up, a flicker of something, annoyance, fear, in his eyes. He put the phone to his ear, turning his back to me to listen to the message. I tried not to watch, busying myself with the kettle, but I could see his reflection in the dark kitchen window. I saw his free hand clench into a tight fist. I couldn't hear the words, only a low, masculine murmur from the earpiece, but I saw the effect they had on him. The color drained from his face. The man of the year, the respected surgeon, suddenly looked small and hunted. The message ended. He stood frozen for a second before he quickly dialed. "Marcus," he said, his voice a low, forced imitation of his usual confident tone. "I got your message. There's no need for that." He paused, listening. His knuckles were white where he gripped the phone. "No, of course there isn't a problem. It's a simple matter of liquidity. A transfer is pending. I am a financial analyst. I know what liquidity means. It's what you say you have when you have no cash. It's a stalling tactic." He was lying, and whoever was on the other end of that line knew it. The voice on the other end must have grown sharper, because my father's pretense of calm cracked. "Listen, you will get your money," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Threats are not necessary. I am a man of my word." Threats. The word hung in the air between us, an invisible poison. He listened again, then said, "Fine. Another week. But that's it." He ended the call and stood with his back to me for a long time, his head bowed. He thought I hadn't heard. He was wrong. This changed every variable in my risk assessment. This Marcus wasn't a customer service agent from an online casino. He wasn't a bank manager. The tone, the reaction, my father's visceral fear, this was something else entirely. This was the world of bookies and loan sharks, a world where debts weren't just numbers on a page. In that world, collateral wasn't a house or a car. It was you. It was your family. My blood ran cold. The price of silence had just skyrocketed. This was no longer about bankruptcy or public shame. It was about our safety. Fear is a powerful motivator. It can paralyze you, or it can force you to act. The sound of my father whispering about threats on the phone had flipped a switch in my brain. The part of me that analyzed market volatility was now running a continuous, high-speed analysis of my family's imminent collapse. The system was overloaded with risk, and the primary operators, my parents and my brother, were actively disabling all the safety protocols. It was time to seek outside counsel. I needed a different kind of analyst. I needed a lawyer. I met my friend David at a sterile coffee shop halfway between my parents' town and my apartment, a neutral territory where we were unlikely to be seen. David was a corporate attorney, a man who lived and breathed contracts and loopholes. His world was as structured and logical as mine, and I needed that clarity. I bought 2 black coffees and laid out my problem, framing it as a hypothetical case study about a client's family. I stripped it of names and emotion, presenting only the raw data. The respected patriarch, the secret addiction, the depleted assets, the enabling family, and now, the veiled threats. He listened without interruption, his sharp eyes focused on me, processing the information. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his coffee. "This isn't a corporate restructuring, Olivia. This is a mess," he said bluntly. "From a legal standpoint, your options for forcing a solution are grim." He explained the standard playbook. First, the therapeutic route, a family intervention, encouraging the subject to enter treatment and attend support groups. "It's the best option for a real recovery," he said, "but it has a 0% chance of success if he refuses to participate. You can't sue someone into sobriety." "What if he's a danger to himself and the family's finances?" I pressed, hoping for a legal lever I could pull. "Is there a way to take control of the assets?" David shook his head. "You're talking about a conservatorship, declaring him legally incompetent to manage his own affairs. To do that, you'd have to go to court and prove to a judge that he is mentally incapable. Not that he's making bad decisions, but that he fundamentally can't understand them. He's a respected surgeon. He'd hire his own lawyers, get his own psychiatric evaluations. It would be a public, brutal, and very expensive war that you would almost certainly lose." The path was a dead end. Every legal avenue seemed to lead to a brick wall of personal consent and public perception. The law was designed to protect a man like my father, a man with a good name, even if that name was now just a shell. I must have looked defeated, because David's professional demeanor softened. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Forget the legal options for a second. Let's talk about risk management. Who is this guy Marcus? Is he from a casino? Or is he a private lender?" "I think he's private," I admitted, the word tasting like poison. The call was different. It was personal. David's expression became serious. "Okay, Olivia, drop the hypothetical stuff. This is about you now," he said, his gaze intense. "Here is my most important piece of legal advice, and I want you to listen carefully. Protect yourself. Right now. If your father has gotten himself into debt with a criminal element, they don't give a damn about legal structures or whose name is on the bank account. They see a prominent family with assets." He let that sink in. "They see you," he continued, his words hitting me like pellets of ice. "A successful daughter with a clean credit record and a high-paying job. If they can't get the money from him, they will look for other pressure points. They will come to you. They will assume you're part of the solution, whether you want to be or not." I had walked into this coffee shop looking for a way to save my family. I was walking out with a chilling realization. I was no longer just a spectator to the disaster. I was now a potential target. David's final warning was a ghost that followed me back to the house. "They will come to you." I thought he meant the criminals. I never imagined he meant my own family. Have you ever looked at the people you love and seen strangers? Not just strangers, but a clear and present danger to your own survival? The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a closing financial position, a bad investment I couldn't exit, and my personal exposure was about to exceed all acceptable limits. They cornered me the next evening. It was a planned ambush, cloaked in civility. My mother and Ben found me in the formal living room, the one room in the house reserved for solemn occasions and important guests. My mother sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clenched in her lap, while Ben stood by the fireplace, adopting the posture of a man about to deliver a difficult but necessary directive. There was no preamble. They had a singular, unified purpose, and I was its target. They had come to collect. "Olivia," Ben began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. He sounded like a banker explaining the terms of a predatory loan. "Mom and I have been talking, and we've come up with a solution. A way to put this all behind us, for good." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet room. "There's a specific amount that Dad owes this person. It's a large amount. $50,000. If we can pay it, he's promised to disappear. The slate will be wiped clean." He looked at me, his eyes holding no room for negotiation. My blood turned to ice. $50,000. The number was both absurdly large and terrifyingly specific. It meant they weren't guessing. They knew the exact depth of the hole. Then my mother spoke, her voice a soft, pleading murmur. "We can't get another loan, darling. The bank, they won't approve it. And we have nothing left to sell." Her eyes, so full of practiced social grace, were now just pools of raw desperation. I didn't need to ask what was coming next. The conclusion was foregone, a chillingly logical end to their desperate equation. "You have a perfect credit history," Ben stated, as if he were reading from my financial profile. "An excellent income. For you, getting a loan for that amount would be simple, a formality. For us, it's impossible. We need you to do this, Liv. Take out the loan in your name. We'll pay you back. Every cent. I swear." He made it sound so reasonable, so transactional. "It's just a signature on a piece of paper for you. But for us, for Dad, it's a lifeline. It's salvation." A wave of nausea and fury washed over me. This was it. This was the betrayal David had predicted, but 1,000 times more intimate and grotesque. They weren't just asking me to cover for them. They were asking me to chain myself to the anchor that was sinking their ship. To sacrifice my financial future, my security, to feed my father's disease and enable their conspiracy of silence. To entangle myself, legally and financially, with the very criminal element that terrified me. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. "Absolutely not." Ben's face hardened. "What do you mean, no? This is your family." My mother started to cry, soft, calculated sobs. "Olivia, please. Think about what could happen if we don't pay him. Think about your father." I stood my ground, my voice cold and clear. "I am thinking about him. And giving an addict $50,000 isn't helping him. It's buying his next fix. The answer is no." My mother looked up, her tears instantly gone, her face a mask of bitter, ugly resentment. The desperation had curdled into venom. She stood up, her voice trembling with a rage that seemed to have been simmering for years. "I should have known," she spat, the words dripping with poison. "All your life, it's always been about the numbers, the risk, the bottom line. You can't see the people, can you? You can only see the figures on a spreadsheet." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into me. "I always knew that your love for us was measured in numbers." My mother's words were meant to be a killing blow, the final, ugliest weapon in her arsenal of emotional warfare. "Your love for us was measured in numbers." For a moment, her attack landed. I felt a surge of shame and doubt. Was she right? Was I just a cold analyst incapable of understanding love and loyalty? But then, clarity cut through the pain like a laser. They were the ones quantifying love. They had put a precise price on it. $50,000. What do you do when the people you love become the greatest risk in your portfolio? You change the strategy. You stop playing defense. You stage a hostile takeover. The next 48 hours were a blur of cold, calculated action. I was done trying to reason with them. Reason had no place in their ecosystem of denial. So, I used the skills they so despised. I became the analyst. I researched. I made calls. I formulated a plan. I found a man named Dr. Miles Corbin, an intervention specialist based in Charlotte. His website was calm and professional, filled with testimonials from families who had been pulled back from the same brink where mine was now teetering. He was my last, best option. Getting my mother and brother to agree was the hardest sales pitch of my life. I couldn't tell them the truth. They would have bolted, built their walls even higher. So, I lied. I used their own language, their own desperate logic against them. I've been thinking, I told them, my voice a carefully calibrated mix of contrition and practicality. You're right. We need a solution. I spoke with a financial advisor, a specialist in complex debt situations. He thinks he can help us figure out a payment plan, restructure things, but he needs to meet with all of us to understand the full picture. The bait was perfect. The word financial was the key that unlocked their cooperation. They didn't hear therapist or counselor. They heard money guy. Ben was skeptical at first, but my mother, clinging to any hope that didn't involve public shame, latched onto the idea. A financial solution, she repeated, the words a soothing balm. Yes, that sounds sensible. We agreed to meet at the house on Saturday morning. They thought they were meeting a debt consolidator. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush of truth. Dr. Corbin arrived exactly at 10 o'clock. He was a quiet man in his 50s with calm, intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. He didn't look like a savior or a warrior. He looked like a professor, carrying a worn leather briefcase. I met him at the door and led him into the living room, the same room where my family had tried to sacrifice me on the altar of their denial. My mother and Ben were already there, looking expectant and nervous. My father was the last to arrive, walking in with an air of grudging authority, clearly annoyed at having his weekend disturbed for a family budget meeting. Dr. Corbin shook everyone's hand, his demeanor gentle but firm. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice calm and even. "My name is Miles Corbin. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a certified interventionist, and we're here today to talk about how Robert's gambling addiction is affecting this family." The shift in the room was instantaneous and violent. It was like a sudden catastrophic drop in cabin pressure. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ben shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. But my father's reaction was the most terrifying. His face turned a deep mottled red. "Get out of my house," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Dr. Corbin. "This is a trick, a setup. I will not be subjected to this." He turned to leave, but Dr. Corbin didn't flinch. "Robert, I can't make you stay," he said, his voice remaining perfectly level. "But these three people love you enough to do something this difficult. I'm asking you to love them enough to listen for just 10 minutes. Something in his tone, a complete lack of fear or judgment, made my father hesitate at the door. The intervention had begun. My father stood frozen in the doorway, caught in the invisible crossfire between his instinct to flee and Dr. Corbin's unnerving calm. The air in the room was thick with betrayal. To my family, I had committed the ultimate sin. I had let a stranger see behind the curtain. And what he saw was not the great and powerful Oz, but a scared man in a cheap suit pulling levers. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, my father turned from the door, his face a mask of cold fury, and walked slowly back to his armchair. He didn't sit. He stood beside it, a king refusing to take his throne in a court of traitors. Dr. Corbin didn't acknowledge this small victory. He simply nodded and opened his briefcase. "The purpose of this is not to shame or to blame," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. "It is to communicate. We are going to read some letters that have been prepared. Each of you will have a turn to speak, uninterrupted, about how Robert's gambling has personally affected you." He looked at me. "Olivia, you'll begin." I picked up the single sheet of paper from the coffee table. It trembled in my hand. What if this was the final mistake that broke everything forever? I took a breath and began to read. My voice sounded foreign, a flat, clinical recitation of facts in a room charged with raw emotion. "Dad, I've spent my career analyzing risk. I model the consequences of bad decisions. For the last few weeks, I've been running a model on our family, and the projection is total catastrophic failure." I detailed the numbers as I knew them: the second mortgage, the drained accounts, the $50,000 debt to a man who makes threats. "I am not angry," I read, though my heart was pounding with it. "I am terrified. I am terrified of the day when your good name is worth nothing, and all we are left with is the debt." When I finished, he stared at me, his eyes filled with a look of such profound contempt that I felt it like a physical blow. I had confirmed his worst fears. I was the cold, calculating daughter, turning his life into a spreadsheet. Dr. Corbin then nodded to Ben. My brother wouldn't look at me. His letter was crumpled in his fist. He smoothed it out and began, his voice thick with a conflict that tore him apart. He spoke of his admiration, of wanting to be a man just like our father. Then his voice broke. "But I spend my days lying for you now," he read. "I move money, I screen calls, I make excuses. I am the chief administrator of your secret, and it is exhausting. I'm not protecting you anymore, Dad. I'm helping you disappear." My father flinched. Ben's words, coming from his most loyal defender, were a crack in his armor. But it wasn't enough. The wall of denial was still standing. Then, it was my mother's turn. She held her paper in two hands as if it were a prayer book. She was no longer the elegant hostess or the brave martyr. She was just a woman of 60, looking at her husband of nearly 40 years, her face a ruin of fear and exhaustion. She didn't read so much as confess, the words spilling out in a ragged whisper. "Robert," she began, and the name itself was a sob. "I don't sleep anymore. I lie in bed and I listen for your car. I listen to you come up the stairs, trying to tell from your footsteps if it was a good night or a bad night. The man I married was my partner. But now I feel like the loneliest person in the world because I am married to a ghost. You are here, but you are gone." She looked up from the paper, her eyes flooded with tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "I am not afraid of losing the house. I am not afraid of what people will say. I am afraid that I have already lost you. Please," she begged, the word a final, desperate plea. "Come back." That was it. That was the blow the facade could not withstand. We all watched as Dr. Robert Hayes, the man of the year, the pillar of the community, finally shattered. His shoulders, which had been squared with indignation, sagged. The fury in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a wave of such profound and bottomless shame that it was painful to witness. He sank into the armchair, not like a king, but like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He covered his face with his hands, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father weep. The room was silent, save for the sound of a man's world ending. After a long moment, Dr. Corbin spoke into the stillness. "There's a facility in the mountains, Robert. A good one. They're expecting you. The car is waiting outside." My father didn't look up. He just nodded his head into his hands and whispered a single, broken word. "Okay." The car pulled away, taking my father with it, and a silence descended on the house that was heavier and more absolute than any sound. The battle was over. The facade had been demolished. But victory didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing in the rubble of a bombed-out city, the air thick with dust and the smell of ruin. We had won the war, but now we had to live in the wreckage. Have you ever gotten exactly what you wanted, only to discover the price was far higher than you ever calculated? The first casualty was the myth of our solvency. With my father gone, Ben and I finally had unrestricted access to the complete, unvarnished financial truth. It was worse than I had imagined. My $50,000 estimate for the criminal debt was tragically optimistic. The real number was closer to 90,000. There were other debts too. Maxed out credit cards, personal loans from colleagues under false pretenses, a whole constellation of black holes sucking the life out of my father's name. The picture wasn't one of a man spiraling. It was a man who had already hit the ground and was now digging. There was only one possible solution, one asset large enough to cover the bleeding: the house, the grand colonial that was the physical embodiment of the Hayes family legacy. Putting the "for sale" sign on the front lawn felt like planting a tombstone. It was a public declaration of our failure, a 4-foot by 3-foot confession to the entire town. Within days, the whispers started. You could feel the town's perception of us shifting in real time. We were no longer the admirable Hayes family. We were a story, a cautionary tale, a scandal. My mother and Ben, who had been united with me in the sanitized, controlled environment of the intervention, now turned their grief and humiliation outward, and the closest target was me. I was the architect of this public shaming. "Are you happy now, Olivia?" Ben snarled at me one afternoon as we sorted through boxes of my father's old awards. "You got what you wanted. You exposed him. Now the whole world gets to watch us crawl through the mud. Was it worth it?" He wasn't seeing the disease anymore, only the shame of the cure. My mother was worse. She retreated into a state of fragile, weaponized sorrow. She spoke to me in clipped, resentful tones, as if my very presence were a constant reminder of the disgrace I had brought upon them. "Mrs. Gable from the charity board called today," she told me, her voice dripping with martyrdom. "She was just calling to see how I was doing." What am I supposed to say, Olivia? That my husband is in rehab and we're selling our home to pay off his gambling debts? Is that the truth you wanted everyone to hear? They saw my actions not as a rescue, but as a betrayal. I hadn't saved the family. I had exposed it. In their minds, I had chosen a cold, brutal truth over the warm, comfortable lie. They were in mourning for the facade. They missed the beautiful lie because it was so much easier to live in than this ugly, painful reality. I tried to explain that the lie was what had nearly killed us, but they couldn't hear it. The silence in the house wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with unspoken accusations and the suffocating weight of their resentment. I had saved them from drowning, and now they hated me for the violent way I had dragged them back to shore. 3 months can feel like a lifetime. It was the time it took for the real estate transaction to close, for the last of my parents' possessions to be moved into a sterile storage unit, and for my father to complete his program at the rehab facility. The Grand Colonial House now belonged to a cardiologist from Charlotte. The Hayes family, or what was left of it, had moved into a small rented townhouse on the edge of town. It was a place with beige carpets, thin walls, and the lingering smell of someone else's life. It was a home stripped of all history and prestige. My father returned on a Tuesday. I drove to the facility to pick him up, a silent 2-hour drive into the mountains. I didn't know who to expect. Would he be the angry king from the study? The broken man from the intervention? He was neither. The man who walked out of the main doors was quieter, thinner, and looked a decade older than he had 3 months ago. He carried a single canvas duffel bag. The silver in his hair seemed more pronounced, and the lines on his face, which I had always interpreted as marks of wisdom and authority, now looked like fault lines after an earthquake. The drive back was filled with a fragile, unspoken truce. We talked about the weather, the changing leaves on the trees, anything but the one thing that mattered. When we pulled up to the townhouse, he stared at it for a long moment. "It's different," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. He was looking at the physical manifestation of his failure. "It's temporary," I replied, though we both knew that was a lie. This was the new reality. This was the price. What does a man do when he returns from exile to find his kingdom has vanished? The first few weeks were excruciatingly awkward. My mother, Ben, and my father orbited each other in the small space, a trio of strangers bound by a shared trauma they didn't know how to discuss. My mother tried to recreate her old life in miniature, arranging the few pieces of furniture we'd kept with a desperate precision. Ben went to the clinic every day, managing what was left of the practice. And my father, he started going to meetings. Every night at 7 o'clock, he would take the car and drive to a church basement on the other side of town to sit in a circle of folding chairs with other strangers and talk about the truth. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. It started with small things. He stopped offering opinions and started asking questions. He made coffee for my mother in the morning. He helped Ben with the clinic's bookkeeping, his face a study in quiet concentration as he tallied the cost of his own destruction. The bravado was gone. The certainty was gone. In its place was a quiet, painful humility. He was a man learning to live without his armor, and the process was raw and exposed. About a month after he came home, he asked me to go for a walk. We walked through the unfamiliar streets of their new neighborhood, the silence between us more comfortable than it had been in years. Finally, he stopped and turned to me. "I've been working on my apologies," he said, looking at his hands, not at me. "I have a lot of them to make, but I needed to start with you." He finally met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw no artifice, no denial, no anger. I just saw my father. "You were right, Olivia," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I was sick. I was a coward. You did the thing that no one else was brave enough to do. You told the truth." He took a breath. "And you saved my life. I am sorry it took me so long to see that." The words didn't fix everything. They didn't bring back the house or the money or the good name. But they were a start. They were the first solid brick in a new foundation. 1 year. That's what it takes for a market to crash and begin a slow recovery. It's what it takes for a company to file for bankruptcy and emerge, leaner and restructured. It's the time it takes for a wound to scar over. I drove to the townhouse on a crisp autumn Saturday, 1 year to the day after the intervention. The for sale sign in front of our old house had long since been replaced by the name of another family. Our family's name, the one my father had called the only true currency, had been devalued, disgraced, and ultimately redefined. The townhouse wasn't a symbol of failure anymore. It was just a home. My mother had plants in the windows now, and the beige walls were covered in mismatched frames holding photos of a family that looked nothing like the perfect portrait from the gala. We were smiling in these pictures, but we also looked tired. We looked real. My mother greeted me at the door with a genuine hug, smelling of paper and dust from her job at the town library. She was no longer just a surgeon's wife. She was Caroline, the woman who could find you a first edition and who ran the children's story hour on Wednesdays. She had her own name now. My father was in the small living room, reading. He wasn't a surgeon anymore, not in the way he had been. The board had suspended his license pending a review, but he hadn't fought it. Instead, he volunteered 2 days a week as a consultant at a free clinic downtown. He listened to people's problems, offered advice, and guided them to the right specialists. He no longer held a scalpel, but he was healing people nonetheless, in a quieter, more fundamental way. He was paying back a debt that wasn't measured in dollars, but in service. We sat down for dinner that night. The four of us crowded around a small table that had come from a second-hand store. A year ago, our dinners had been filled with talk of achievements, of hospital politics, of social events. They were press conferences designed to reinforce the family brand. Tonight, my mother talked about a funny argument she'd overheard in the history section. Ben, who now managed the scaled-down clinic with a weary competence, complained about an insurance company's bureaucracy. He was no longer the heir to a throne. He was a small business owner, and the reality of it had made him a man. Then my father spoke. He talked about a young patient at the free clinic, a single mother scared about a diagnosis. He didn't talk about how he, Dr. Hayes, had brilliantly advised her. He talked about her courage. He talked about her fear. He was talking about his feelings, cloaked in the story of another. My mother reached across the table and put her hand on his. No one said anything. And in that silence, I finally understood. My job was to assess value, and I had been wrong all along. I thought the facade, the reputation, the good name, was our greatest asset. But it was a liability, a toxic one that was poisoning us from the inside. Tearing it down wasn't an act of destruction. It was the most important investment I would ever make. It was a painful, brutal, and necessary cost to give us something of actual value, a chance to be a real family.